And enough of you convinced me to record these sessions again. So these will be available on my YouTube channel. Folks, I really sincerely appreciate you joining me this morning. So for those of you who don't know the format, I'll talk for probably close to an hour, give you some perspective, some thoughts on accountability with heart, and give you some of my thoughts around that. And then we stay on for a half an hour. If you're able and have the time, stay on for a half an hour. We shut off the slides and just have a good dialogue. So if there's some philosophy, some points that I'm bringing up that doesn't resonate with you, or you want to ask more about it, you have some questions about, there'll be an opportunity for some dialogue. People tell us that that is the most powerful part sometimes of these presentations, is the dialogue afterwards. And I will be shutting off the recording after the slide presentation for confidentiality's sake. All right. Before we move ahead, there's a couple things I want to say. First of all, I want to welcome the folks from south of the border. We had this intention. Well, usually we have these on the last Friday of the month, but given it is Thanksgiving down south, we wanted to make sure that we gave an opportunity for folks that are our American friends to join us. And you may not know this if you're south of the border, but we have a little team up here in Western Canada that had a little accomplishment this week, actually. And so I want to congratulate the Riders Nation. And I hope you're having a good time partying out there in Saskatchewan and from across the country, that there seems to be Rider fans everywhere in our country these days. Congratulations. Now, you should know this if you don't live in the country. You should know this, that Saskatchewan doesn't really have a football team. It's not really a football team. It's actually a religion. So this is kind of like this, and kids get indoctrinated very early in their life. My son-in-law grew up in Saskatchewan. So I can't really stop the indoctrination process that's already going on. But congratulations to our Saskatchewan Rough Riders up here. All right. Having said that, that's a segue into my next slide. I always like to start a presentation, never like to start a meeting without a story. And I want to give tribute and dedicate this presentation to my good friend, Bob Chartier. Now, I haven't seen Bob for a while. Bob has long since retired. He was a public servant leader. If you were in the federal public service 10 years ago, you'd have known Bob. He impacted people from across the country. He's long since retired, but he's a poet and he still speaks. And he's a musician, very gifted musician. And every month, he sends out a little news letter called Stories from the Ordinary. And I just got to shine a light on a story that landed in my inbox yesterday, and just shine a light on this beauty. Bob is a guy that radiates my values. He and I are on the same page. Best part of my work, folks, is some of the people I've met over the years. And Bob is one of those high-class guys that represents the human values and represents what I stand for. And I want to just give you a little summary of the article. And I would encourage you, just look up Bob Chartier, Stories from the Ordinary, get on his email list and get his stories every month. They are well worth 5 minutes to sit back and concentrate and just reflect on humanity. Okay. Now, the story this month was him growing up speaking of Saskatchewan, in Battleford, Saskatchewan. And he talked about baseball, and he talked about the value of baseball in his community and how baseball brought his community together. And this will all be linked into accountability, I hope, in some way, because we're just opening your heart before we get into talking about accountability. But he talked about the value of baseball in Battleford, Saskatchewan. And he talked about all the Black players in the 50s. These Black players that weren't wanted in the South states came up here to play baseball. And then he talked about the value of he actually got 3 tickets to the 1992 World Series in Toronto, and talked about what it was like to be there in the stands and what it was like. And then he came forward in around 2025, and he talked about the difference and what he saw in this year's World Series. And I'm just going to give you the last 2 paragraphs of his story this this month, just to give you a feel of the kind of person that he is. That said, the 2025 World Series was remarkably different, comparing it to the 1992 World Series. I saw baseball and baseball players through a warmer lens. I saw those American boys showing love and respect for our country. I saw the quiet humanity of the 51 on the cap story. I saw Canadians who never liked baseball come out of their chairs. I saw for a lightning moment, East and West celebrating together. So Tom Hanks, I saw that there is crying in baseball. But for me, they were not tears of loss, but tears of hope. I'm out on a limb here, but I wonder if we would be as well off in our hearts if it had been a win for the Jays, a win that would have put us in the street, puffed up, full of sporting pride. The loss gave us something else. It gave me more positive conversations than ever about the country, about sport, about men, and about values. So just stop and reflect on the celebration of humanity as we go through this. All right. Now I'm going to talk to you about accountability. My original thoughts and perspective were developed, and philosophy of accountability were developed in learning to work with families and building accountability and family systems. And then many of you know my story. I took what I learned about family systems, and we had business executives coming to my parenting talks back in the 80s. And I developed this philosophy around accountability. And then I went into business with these two guys, Bruce Klatt and Sean Murphy. We wrote this book called Accountability, Getting a Grip on Results. And if you were in Calgary, in the top 10 oil companies in Calgary, in the 90s, you'd have used our accountability book, a process. And it's really what launched my career. But there was something missing in the work. And it was very transactional. It was, we talked about the process, but there was something philosophical that was missing. And I went and did some research. I used to always think you had to know something to write a book about it. What I've learned is if you want to learn something, write a book about it and travel around and talk about it. That's how I've learned. And so I've since upgraded my thinking, and we have since taken my whole notion of accountability and brought it into organizations through my work over the last 30 years. But I want to talk about the conditions for accountability. And this is something that we didn't talk about in our original book. If you want to produce something in your life, know what the conditions are that takes to create that. You have to know what the conditions are for accountability. And you can't just throw a process in without understanding the conditions. When a flower doesn't bloom, you don't fix the flower. You change the environment in which it grows. And I want to talk about the environment of accountability. And frankly, folks, you can apply this to any environment that's required to have accountability. You can apply it to your family. You can apply it, obviously, to your workplace. You can apply it to a community. And frankly, you can apply it to our whole society, because I think we're in a bit of an accountability crisis. And I'm going to put a word on, I'm going to put some philosophy to how we might resolve some of that through a personal level, through a personal lens. So these are the 4 conditions of accountability. You have to have ownership. You want to have a connection. You need to have engagement, and you have to have a clear process. And I'm going to break this down. I know many of us just get me to the process. Tell me how to manage expectations. Tell me how to have the tough conversations. But you got to really understand that there's got to be some conditions before the process for accountability to flourish. Now, you can't just have the conditions without the process. You still have to have a process. And one of the things I'm be asking you is, what is your process for managing expectations within your teams? And how is that process working for you? If the process is working for you, and this is how I measure whether a process is working, is, are you getting the results that you want? And are people satisfied and finding meaning in their work and engaged in the process? If people, then you're probably, without knowing it, you're probably incorporating these conditions without knowing it. But if you're just hammering people and pushing people and controlling people, which is what we've typically seen as accountability, we just got to control people more, then you're missing the boat here. Okay? I want to start by talking about what's in the middle of all this, and why am I even talking about this? Why is accountability so fundamental in my life? And I can get off on a little bit of a rant here, but it's fundamental. It's the root of my life. No one wants on their headstone to be said, well, they were accountable. But accountability is a philosophy of life that gets you where you really want to go in life. So I'll just give you a really quick review of for those of you who've been through my presentations, you know what my definition of accountability is, something I learned on the farm growing up, which is the ability to be counted on. It's being shake a hand and said, you can count on me for this, right? Make a list of everybody in your life you can count on. Just take a moment in your own mind and think about it in your own mind. Who can you count on? What's it like? Reflect on what it's like to be around those people. Now consider whose list will you have earned the right to be on. Think about what it's like to be around people that you can count on, that if they make a promise, you know they're going to keep it. You know they're going to follow through. You can sleep at night. And what I hear is, and by the way, you could throw into the chat room some thoughts around what's it like to be around accountable people, people that can be counted on. I can tell you my vice president of client care is very accountable. I can count on her, Marg, and it's enlivening, it's engaging, it's exhilarating, it's relaxing, because I know that I don't have to stress about whether or not Marg's going to keep her promise. Now, it helps to hire the right people, but once you hire the right people and you hire for accountability, then it's engaging to be around these people. And I always say, you know, what have you done? Reflect on ways you want to consider showing greater appreciation for these people in your life. And what we tend to do is they don't create a lot of noise. Accountable people, they don't cause the squeaky wheel, so they don't tend to get the attention. And oftentimes we can take them for granted. And I would just say, reflect on the people that are accountable in your life and shine a light on. I always say, if you want to build accountability in your systems that you work and live in, don't do it with a stick, do it with a flashlight. Shine a light on what you see, what you expect, and shine a light on when you see that coming through. Now, I gave a presentation 2 nights ago to a men's organization in our town here in Cochrane. We talked about men's mental health. And this is very personal to me because this is me taking the picture, not speaking, obviously, but this is the group of men that I spoke to. And I shared my own journey through mental health, my own mental health challenges. And I'll tell you that it's accountability and integrity that I'm going to explain here in a minute that really got me through to the other side in my own mental health challenges. My parents planted the seeds of this years ago, but you know, like most seeds, they take a while to germinate. And even though they planted those seeds, they really never germinated until I actually started to do this work and teach it. It wasn't in my 40s that this began to get integrated. And it was when my struggle with mental health, I began to understand the power of accountability. See, accountability is honoring the promises that we make to ourselves. Now, we all talked about what it's like, reflected on what it's like to be around people you can count on. But when you can count on yourself, that raises your own self-respect to a higher level. Then you operate with integrity. And then when you have integrity, you earn self-respect and the respect from the people around you. And for years, I didn't understand this. My dad taught me this. My mom taught me this back in the day, but it really never got integrated until I had my own challenges and I began to understand. You see, when I spend probably 20 hours of every week working in the addictions field, and things I know about addiction is when you have addiction and you have challenges with addiction, you don't have any integrity. You might say, I'm not going to get drunk today. And then by 4 o'clock, you're drunk. You have no integrity and you have no self-respect. And what I realize is that recovering addicts are really growing their integrity. They're recovering their integrity. I talked to a young man this morning. He's got had a crystal meth addiction. He's been clean now for about 3 years. But when he got clean, he gained 400 pounds. He gained 350 pounds. He got up to almost 500 pounds. And I'm talking to him every day. And he's making promises to me every day about what he's going to do to work a program. And that promise that he's making to me and to himself is building integrity back into his life. And what that's giving him is self-respect. And I just admire this young man greatly. for what he's doing. Private victory, Steve Covey used to say, precedes a public victory. Have a private victory to start the day, and that's what gives you integrity. Now, if there's any engineers on our call today, I'm going to simplify what, you've got to have a much more complex definition of structural integrity. But any structure, our life would cease to exist without engineers, by the way. We take structures for granted, but every structure was built with whether it's a building that you're in right now or whether it's a bridge that you cross. Every structure has a stamp of approval by some engineer along the way that said this structure has integrity, the ability of a structure to support a designed load without breaking or collapsing. It assures that the structure will perform its design function. Now, folks, if you don't have integrity in your own life, you don't have the structural integrity to hold up to the demands of life. And just like every structure has to have integrity, I argue every human being has to live a life of integrity to have the structure of their life keep up and assured that they won't collapse under the demands of life. And I begin to wonder, are we raising our young people today to have that kind of structural integrity to deal with the toughness of life without ease? And so with too much ease, what happens is that we don't have the strength, the internal fortitude that comes from structural integrity. So here's just a summary of accountability in terms of the impact. Turn all expectation conversations into clear agreements. Now, folks, there's three kinds of conversations in life. There's entertaining conversations where we just, entertain each other and have a good, enlightening conversation about news, sports, and weather or whatever. There's educational conversations where you're learning something, and then there's expectation conversations. And expectation conversations mean I need something from you, or you need something from me, or both. Don't ever leave those conversations without a clear agreement. What can you count on? What can I count on? Think carefully before you make an agreement. Only make agreements that you know you will honor, and write agreements down. I'm old school. I carry this little black book around with me, and I'm careful. I've had to learn this. I've had to learn this by teaching it. I've had to learn this, that every time I make an agreement with somebody, I write it down here, and then this goes into my device at the end of the day. Write those agreements down. Be impeccable about keeping promises, and then have a recovery process. Now, I got a friend who got laid off about a month ago, and he's been going to job interviews. And 3 weeks ago, he was in an organization, and he said, I think I passed the test, and I think they really liked me. And I asked them when I was finished the job interview, when can I count on hearing from you? And they said, we'll get back to you the middle of next week. Now, it's been 3 weeks. Now, why would we make a promise? Why would we make a promise? Now, maybe without any intention on keeping it. Now, maybe they intended on keeping it, but then you have to have a recovery process. And the recovery process says, let your creditor, if you make a promise to somebody, if you struggle with mental health, this is something that you got to learn by experience. Let your creditor know as soon as you know that your agreement is jeopardized. You have a creditor. As soon as you make a promise to somebody, including yourself, that your agreement, let them know if your agreement is in jeopardy. Now, maybe that the person who did that interview, maybe the head office or whatever changed their priorities and says, we're not going to be in the higher, who knows what went on. But now your promise is in jeopardy. Your agreement is in jeopardy. Make a note then to contact this person. I know I promised to get back to you by next Wednesday, but we can't keep that promise because something else came up and I can't get back to you for another month. At least now we know where you stand. As my parents would always say, under promise and over deliver. Be intentional about your promises. Know when you've made a promise. Don't take promises lightly, and get really clear on what those promises are. Negotiate with your creditor at this point to minimize damages and to recommit to a new agreement if you have to, and learn from your experience so that this doesn't happen again. So that's the impact. I can't tell you the impact of that keeping a promise, whether it's to get to a child's soccer game, whether it's to show up and exercise in the morning because you made a promise with yourself. My dad taught me it was mind over mattress. If you make a promise at 9 o'clock at night that you're going to get up and exercise, whatever that exercise is, this is not the time to change your promise at 6 o'clock when the alarm goes off. This is mind over mattress. We all understand what it's like. Put your feet on the floor in the morning and do something that's hard because you made a promise. It doesn't matter whether it's hard. What matters is you made the promise. And when you can follow through on that promise, an hour later, after you've exercised, we think that you get endorphins from the exercise. I argue you get endorphins from integrity, from keeping a promise to yourself because you feel a little bit better rather than just saying, oh, I think I'll just sleep in this morning. That's not the time to make a decision. You already made the decision. Now, if you end up waking up sick and you don't feel like, you're not physically able to exercise, then you make arrangements. You negotiate with the creditor, namely yourself, to minimize damages, and you recommit to a new agreement when you're well. Now, if you don't want to exercise in the morning, you don't have to exercise to have integrity. If you need more rest than exercise, then make a promise to yourself you're going to sleep in an hour later and wake up an hour later and have more sleep. Then you can keep your integrity. This is just being really intentional. And I can get a little obsessed about this, but I know the value that it is in my own life to be really clear. When you send somebody an email, and by the way, a request is not an agreement. Make sure you get an agreement. Can I count on this by Friday, end of day? Can I count on it before you go home on Friday night? And just because what we tend to do is we say, well, I'm just going to, can you get it done as soon as possible? Well, we all know what that means, that we all have a different definition of what that soon as possible. This is what I learned from my parents, but I never really sunk in till I was in my 40s. Amazing how smart your parents can get. Don't ever make a promise you don't intend to keep. See all blame as a waste of time. Nobody but you. By the way, the day you decide that all blame is a waste of time, that day your life will change forever. Nobody but you cares about the reason why you let somebody down. Turn the lights off when you leave. My dad used to teach me this, right? We didn't stay in hotels too often, but he always circled around. I said, what's the big deal? He said, turn the lights off. Be an owner. Do more than you get paid for. The most important contributions you'll make don't come with a paycheck. And no matter what, be the light. You be the light. You be the light. No matter what people do, you be the light. Doesn't matter. Love people anyway. All right. Now, let me give you the 4 conditions. And I want to walk you through this in a little more detail. That's kind of the inspirational part. And I'm going to be philosophical, and then we're going to move down closer to the practical. First of all, indicators of a lack of accountability. Again, we don't have my good colleague, Kristen, with us this morning. I meant to express that. It's never quite the same. So we don't have a person helping us here read the chat room. But these are feel free to put in the chat room what you find as indicators of a lack of accountability. Asking who's accountable for that without a clear answer. Missed deadlines and inefficiencies. Acceptance of substandard performance. Work visibility and progress updates are poor, resulting in micromanagement, a culture of blame and finger pointing, low trust, high tension and frustration, disengagement and poor quality work. Now, we can all see this in others. We can all see a lack of accountability. If you've ever worked in an organization that lacks some accountability, you can see it in other people. But as Oscar Wilde said, responsibility is what we expect from somebody else. So, look within yourself. This is called an ownership mentality, to say, I'm going to take responsibility, to say, I'm going to be an accountable person. For reflection on an ownership mentality, think of a person in your life that you would describe as an unaccountable person that is creating a problem for you because of their lack of accountability. Now ask yourself, how are you contributing to the problem that you're complaining about? Because oftentimes what we do is that unaccountability will breed unaccountability. So it's easier to see a lack of accountability always in other people. It's far easier to be sitting in a dentist's office when your dentist is 20 minutes late and blame your dentist for being late. Well, when did you keep people waiting? How are you contributing to the problem? That's the question. And then what if you were somebody else's unaccountable person? So think within yourself. What can you do? For example, if you send somebody an email and they don't return the email, and you've asked to have that project have an agreement by Friday, and they don't get back to you, don't blame them for being an unaccountable person. Look at, hey, maybe I need to be clearer. Maybe I need to really own the situation and say, I'm going to look at my side of the street and I'm going to be clear about what my agreement is. Can I count on that? Don't just ask, get an agreement. I need to be clear about that. Or I need to say, this is a person I can't count on. So there's some consequences to that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's what I want to do is that I want to examine the outdated, what I call a paternal or patriarchal employment contract. And I want you to look very carefully within your team and ask yourself in your organization, what kind of what kind of a contract, psychological contract do you hold? And it's historically very common to have what I call a parent-child relationship. In our systems, our bureaucracies, our organizations are rampant with this outdated patriarchal contract. And if you don't change the contract, I don't think we're going to move the needle much on accountability. Otherwise, we just get more compliance rather than real ownership and real commitment. So under the old contract, positional leaders are expected to look after us, provide direction, solve the problems, and create the culture. And employees are expected to get good reviews on their performance evaluation and do what they're told. Think of the parental mindset that's in our typical accountability processes in our organizations. And think of the philosophy that we have and the weight that positional leaders carry. They're expected to be good leaders. And what we expect from leaders is really a defense against our own courage to bring leadership to the work. Positional leaders have responsibility, but so do we all. What we do is that we create what I call consumers. It's very interesting. We call this a consumer society. But in a parent-child relationship, and by the way, you see this in our political realm, we want our politicians to take care of us. Now, there's no question that bad leaders, bad politicians can impact the culture. I'm not negating that, or I'm not in denial of that. But I'm asking you to look a little deeper and just say, what kind of mindset do we have? Consumers are an approach to life that believes our needs are satisfied by other people's action. You got to do it for me. Whatever I have and whatever I get is never enough. And what that does is it breeds certain qualities within a culture. It breeds control. We're trying to control people. It breeds complaining. It breeds compliance or defiance. Same thing that you get from kids. It breeds caution. People cannot speak truth to power. It breeds overdependence. It breeds blaming, and it breeds inevitably entitlement. I have a right to this without any responsibilities. So I'm asking you to really look at, and it's probably not a dichotomy. There's probably a spectrum of how much of a parent-child relationship you have in your workplace versus an adult-to-adult relationship. Now, what I'm proposing here is that we move that from a parent-child relationship to a partnering relationship. And what that looks like is defining and creating an organization that has purpose and meaning, shared power, mutual accountability, and service rather than control or dependency. People act as responsible partners rather than compliant subordinates, really choosing to be accountable for outcomes without coercion and without compliance. That's the vision of what I'm trying to suggest. And what we do is that we move that from consumers to citizens. Rather than waiting for or expecting others to meet our needs or blaming others for not meeting those needs, we choose to be answerable for the well-being of the whole. We end up with a culture of ownership, personal responsibility, and high trust. Now, by the way, you can put this at a political level. Rather than blaming our politicians, you just look up, and this is the difficulty in social media, is just notice the blame culture, complaining culture that we have. That's a symptom, folks, of a lack of being answerable for the well-being of the whole. And what I'm suggesting is that we move from being a complainer to being a creator. Now, again, if you're frustrated and you're sitting there saying, yeah, but my boss doesn't adhere to this. My boss operates from a parent-child relationship. And you're expecting your boss to make the change. Well, you know what? I got news for you. You are reinforcing the same culture that you're complaining about. Because ultimately, if you're in a position of leadership, we got to step back. Now, it doesn't mean that we still don't have a responsibility, but when you get to be a boss, you don't get a promotion, you get a career change. And what comes with that career change, you don't get more power, but you get more accountability. And this is one of the things. So you do have a responsibility, but what I'm suggesting is parents as bosses need to step down to an adult model, but children have to step up to an adult model. If you're depending on your boss to change, you're still caught in the same perspective. Okay. So this is way too much writing for one slide, but I'm going to just have you reflect on the philosophy that I'm suggesting. We often deny that through our perceptions and choices, we create the culture and the leadership that we complain about. The focus on those people is a defense against the courage to take responsibility. And notice when you can always focus, notice how much of our conversation is on those people, whether they're managers or managers get together and talk about employees, those people. The ultimate act of accountability is deciding that because we create our world, we are the ones to step into healing it. Now, I'm not asking you to take accountability for other people. I'm asking you to take accountability for the whole and to say, I'm going to do my part. I have learned that when my approach and attitude and choices that I make are like wearing a set of glasses. And if I change my attitude and my choices, I put a new set of lenses and everything can change with a new set of lenses. I'm the cause of my environment. I'm not the effect. I'm creating my environment. My environment is not creating me. This is an ownership mentality. We decide what this place will become by connecting with our ideals, our values, our dreams, and our purpose. Reward will come from within. It won't come from the institution. I have to feel good about myself. And if you've got an institution that does not support this adult to adult partnering relationship, maybe what it means is, what can I do on my team? What can I do within myself to not be part of the problem, but to bring that accountability mindset and ownership mindset? What is my contribution to the problem that find myself complaining about? Okay. Now, this is now reflected in how we manage performance and how we manage expectations. In a parental review, in a parental process, it's one way. I'm going to evaluate you. It's a review and evaluation. There's supervision. I find it interesting. We use that word supervision, supervisor. Who in this life wants to be supervised? We supervise children. It's an appraisal scoring system. Those of you who have heard me talk know that I am adamantly opposed to appraisal scoring systems. I know they're caught up in our bureaucracy and people love, and we're all caught in this. We like to be evaluated. What right does any of us have to evaluate another person? If you want to test any of your systems that you're working in your organization, just do this test. Bring it home and apply the test to a significant other or your spouse, and see how it goes down when you start to evaluate your spouse. Now, you can let your spouse evaluate you, but to impose that on others is a parent-child system. It's about fixing people, finding their weakness and straightening them out and controlling them more. It's annual, and I'm going to hold you accountable. Versus a partnership, which is two ways. It's honest, respectful feedback to each other. It's clear expectations. And we'll get into this with the process. What do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? And it's trust. It's rather than a scoring system, there's growth opportunities. There's consequences. No question, there's got to be consequence. Without consequence, there's no accountability. But those consequences are clear. And it's not about fixing people. It's about fitting people and really assessing where's the person's fit? Where can they thrive here? And it's ongoing, and we hold each other accountable because we've made agreements to each other, and we move from that top down to a partnership relationship. And what the accountability of positional leaders is to create those conditions where this can happen, where we're moving into a partnership role, a partnership rather than a top down. Now, as a leftover from the last session, if you were here in our last session, we talked about differentiation as a leader. This is where you can take ownership. Now, the S and the O means self and others. So there's 3 responses to a system. And you can get enmeshed in the system where you're blaming, and you can tell when you're enmeshed, and it always comes from caring. But if you find yourself blaming and criticizing and conforming or pleasing and rescuing, over responsibility, no boundaries, guilt, inadequacy, emotional carryover, where you bring emotions home with you, and you just get exhausted. And this is what I'm finding. And the influx of technology, when we carry our devices around us 24/7, it's so easy to not have boundaries and to have those supposed tools become the very definition of how we work and our identity. And we get enmeshed into the system. So just stop and take a check. How enmeshed are you in the system that you work in? Now, the typical response to getting enmeshed is that we go to the other extreme, which is that we exit. We can exit emotionally or exit physically. If we're not in a position, maybe we need our job and we like the paycheck, but we just have been enmeshed or don't want to engage, we just wall up. And the worst we can do is quit and stay, where we disengage, wall up, withdraw, isolate, detach, remove ourselves, shut down, or we just get defiant. And what happens in that case is that in the enmeshed case, we don't take ourselves into consideration. We put other people above ourselves. In the exit strategy, we say other people aren't important. I'm just going to look after myself. And that we remove ourselves from the engaged system, and usually from the enmeshed system rather. And usually what happens is that we get so enmeshed, and then we end up with a nervous breakdown, and then we have to exit the system. And my challenge and invitation is to work at becoming what I call differentiated, non-anxious participation, where we participate actively without taking on the emotions of the system. Unwavering vision amid resistance, calm presence amid anxiety. The anxiety can twirl around you, but you have a calm center within yourself. You're value-centered, you're grounded, you have clear boundaries, you're engaged, what I call engaged compassion, and you have self-regulation over your own emotions. Now, none of us get this perfect, but that's the intent that I work, and that's what leadership is. And by the way, leadership with or without a title, you work on being self-differentiated within your system. That's what's going to keep you healthy. That's you can live your vision there. Now, if you find that you can't, as you move toward differentiation, the system resists that, and that you can't be a fully differentiated person and supported by the values of the culture, then you may have exit as a strategy, but do it as a conscious choice rather than a default as a response to enmeshment. So I would just ask you to reflect on where's your own level of differentiation right now. What do you need to do to start to differentiate yourself? And sometimes we have to go from enmeshment into exiting to get back to differentiation. Sometimes you have to swing the pendulum way too far as a way of grounding yourself before you can get back to differentiation. But that's our work. Come to work differentiated, and then we build partnerships out of differentiated individuals. That's the focus. George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish playwright. This is the true joy of life, the being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, the being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. Now, this is a differentiated statement. Be a force of nature. Be a force of nature. Take care of yourself. We talked about that in the last session, in the last webinar. Be selfish enough that you can then, but again, being selfish doesn't mean that you just look after yourself. It means you take care of yourself so that then you can take care of the culture that you're in. All right. I think they've got one more. The law of the echo. This is what I've learned over the years. Whatever you want in an organization, in a relationship, in a family, in a community, whatever you want, give it. If you want appreciation, get so busy appreciating other people that you don't have time to feel sorry for yourself for not being appreciated. Give what you expect. By the way, this is kind of marriage therapy 101. Whatever you want in a marriage, in a significant relationship, give what you want. You want more love? Bring more love to that relationship. You want more accountability in a system? Be more accountable. Take that ownership and see how that impacts the system around you. Be differentiated and move that contract from the parent to an adult and from the child up to an adult. All right. Now let's talk about connection. I want to go through connection relatively quickly here. Connect before you expect. Relationships before results. My kids taught me this years ago. You can't just come in and hammer on people when they're not being accountable. You have to build that connection in that relationship. Everybody communicates today, folks, but very few people connect. And again, this could be a webinar just on itself, but I use this trust account, Covey's trust account, to really examine where are your relationships. Think of the relationships in your life. Think of those relationships where you're in the black or you're in the red. And the key economic, just like a bank account, you can't make a withdrawal until you make a deposit. When you get into accountability, into the process of accountability, it takes deposits to make those withdrawals. And this is just a list. Express appreciation. You know how few people actually know how to express appreciation. Listen first. Display kindness and courtesy. Offer encouragement. Remember people's names. I still remember Covey's leadership course in university, and one of the key questions was, what's the name of the person who keeps this building clean? Pay attention to people. Be honest and transparent. Right wrongs. Apologize. Catch people doing things right rather than catching them do. Keep your promises. You be the light. Again, get better. Show people, I want to grow from this. I want to get better. Show people around you, whether you're managing your boss or you're managing your team, show them that you have a commitment to learning. I don't have to remind you of that because you're here today. Show loyalty in people's absence versus gossip and diminish others and spread rumors. Be known as a person that you can't go to gossip. And clarify expectations and deliver results and extend trust versus withholding trust. So this just gives you a little bit of a graph to say, where are you? Maybe the number one thing you do as a result of coming in, pick one thing that you learn in this hour that we're together. Pick one thing that you can do differently. And maybe just look at the people in your life that you need to make some deposits with. Maybe those people that you're calling unaccountable, maybe you haven't invested in those relationships enough. Maybe make some deposits in those people in sincere ways. That's something to examine. All right, engagement. Folks, when people are engaged, you don't have to push them to be accountable. They will want to be accountable. And we have not really moved the engagement needle a whole lot. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of videos here. This is actually just a self-serving video to introduce you to my granddaughter. But toddlers, folks, take a bad rap. They start to get independent, just like independent employees take a bad rap, right? When they start to speak their truth. But I'm going to suggest, watch the interaction. And then I'm going to show you a little video about what toddlers can teach us all. All right? So enjoy the first one. I've got two little short videos.
Can you catch the snow on your tongue? Did you catch the snow?
All right. So I probably digressed a little bit, but I just had to pass that video on because I love it so much. Anyway, we get one of those kind of videos about every day. Now I want to watch this little video about what a toddler can teach us all. And we're going to bring it back to leadership here in a moment. By the way, my daughter just sent this to me yesterday. So I was so jazzed by it. I just thought, I'm going to throw this into my webinar because I think it has to do with accountability.
I'm your preschooler's new art teacher. I'm going to tell you something about them and their art that you might not have noticed before. Toddlers don't need erasers. Not one toddler in the history of me teaching has ever asked for an eraser. Toddlers love everything they make. Toddlers don't compare their work to other toddlers. Toddlers don't sit in front of blank canvases and say, what should I make? They just start making. If you are a creative person who feels blocked, sit down with a toddler. Sit down next to a child in preschool or kindergarten or first grade and watch the way they draw. Watch the fearlessness they have when they face the paper, when you put a marker in their hand. Watch their eyes light up when they pick up their favorite color. They're not worrying about whether it matches the color they just used. They're not thinking about what's going to happen to this piece of paper when I'm done with this drawing. Am I going to hang it up? Am I going to put it in a box? Should I throw away? Who should I give it to? They're not worrying about that. They are so in the moment, and whatever they make, they're going to love. They are not going to be hard on themselves about it. If you want to reclaim your creativity, make art with a toddler. You will never feel more inspired.
So what does this have to do with leadership, folks? What does this have to do with leadership? Folks, we all, and every time I present, I show this little drawing, and I know that I've added another circle. So you get used to this drawing. But this is your ikigai, a reason for being. And there's so many things that I know there are standards that we have to uphold in our organization. And I know that there are expectations, but there has to be a corner on every person's desk, in every person's life, where they get to just go beyond what the expectations are and express fully without evaluation and fully engage. How much do you know what people value? What are people's gifts? What are people's passion? And where do people want to contribute? And when those four circles interact and intersect, you will get engagement. And when you're working and having at least a portion of your job that's growing that inner circle, that intersection of those inner circles, you won't have to worry about motivating anybody. And you probably aren't even going to have to worry about being accountable. You might have to fine-tune the expectations. But I'm thinking of this, and Mark, you're on this call. My vice president of client care, who is accountable and shows up. But I don't think that you and I have ever had a conversation. I mean, I preach this stuff. I kind of know what you value. I kind of know what your gifts are. I know what your passion is. But we've never had an explicit conversation to put that on paper and say, how am I supporting you? How is this job supporting you in these four areas? And, and I just think we still don't really intentionally focus on making the room to find this out with people. And I think it would breed a lot more accountability if we paid attention to it. Fit people, folks, don't fix people. Fit people into a role where they can find a place. And if you can't find a place where they are using their gifts and their values and their passion to contribute to the organization, help them move on. Or find another place in the organization where they can. But if you're committed to that again, all these four areas intersect with all the other four areas. Now, let me finish the last 10 minutes here with a clear process. And again, look at your own process for managing expectations in your relationships. Look at your own process. You're welcome to borrow our process here. You're welcome to steal our process. You're welcome to use our process or take it and use your own words. But these are the 5 key elements. If you have a breakdown in accountability, it's likely that one of these 5 areas has been neglected or not attended to. So the first thing is get really clear on what's expected. What are the desired results? And I just want to spend a minute on this on the next slide. What is expected? What are the desired results? Ambiguity breeds mediocrity. Get very clear. Often, I don't think we need to get tougher. We just need to get clearer for most of the time in terms of what we expect from people. We don't have those, what I call upstream conversations when we start a project. What do we actually expect? I'm right now negotiating. I teach at the university, and I'm negotiating with a TA they're giving me in the winter semester starting in January, and we're negotiating. What do I expect from her? What does she expect from me? What's the time commitment? And what results are expected? And if we don't have that heart-to-heart conversation and get real with each other right up front, there's going to be frustration later on. Next thing is, what will we promise to each other? What will I promise you? What will you promise me? And that depends on support requirements. What supports and resources are required? What supports do you need from me? What supports do I need from you? And if you're expecting somebody to fulfill a job and they don't have the resources to fulfill that, if you expect somebody to produce results, but we are not supporting them to get the resources that they need, that is irresponsible leadership. We have to talk about and make it safe to talk about what resources are needed so that we can have a partnership together. Consequence has to do with, why is this important? What is important to each of us? What's the motive behind this? And what's the driving force behind this? What's the motivator behind this? Why are we doing this? Where does your role fit into the larger role? And if you don't come through with me on this, these are the consequences. And we always start with positive consequences. And we can talk more about this in the chat room, chat room and in the community session afterwards. And then how often do we need to assess this? So with my TA, we talked about, we'll touch base every week and just see how it's working for you, how it's working for me. And we'll build this partnership over the course of a semester so that we understand how we're working together and what parties or what stakeholders are involved in this process. So just take a look at your own process and look at any time you have an expectation from somebody else. How much have you? Where in those 5 areas does it get broken down? Maybe we don't talk about how much we have to monitor our progress, but I find even when you're starting to tighten up your accountability process, what's important is that you have to almost say, you know what, I'm going to be overly anal on this. We're going to meet weekly for the next little while just to help me practice making sure that I'm making my expectations clear and that we keep those conversations up. In terms of expectations, I like to draw this little diagram because what I'm proposing here is, instead of activities and and some people just like a job description, but instead of activities, to move it to results, it's to say, if you were the CEO of your own area that you're accountable for, what would that area look like? What would be your business focus? If you were to run a business within this business, what would that look like? And really see if you can define those parameters to say, I'm accountable, I'm answerable for this area and these results. And then on the value side, that's the operational side. Now on the value side, accountability, what behaviors would indicate that you're meeting my expectations to be accountable here? And that's something that you can talk about with individually. What do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? And what will we agree to? This gets accountability, this value of accountability, off the wall and into our actions, into our behaviors, into our conversations. All right, and into our hearts. So just stop and reflect on what might be a breakdown in terms of with your accountability, what needs to be strengthened. Typically, we don't talk about support requirements. Typically, we're not clear in terms of we have requests, but we don't get those number 2, those agreements. Yes, as a carpenter, you got to know when you put that hammer, that last little bit of your nail, you sink the nail. That's the agreement process. Can I count on you to do this? And that's a real missing link for many of us. We don't get that agreement. Can I have that? Can we make sure that can I get that from you on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock before you go home? And I know I'm going to be kind of anal about this, but I'm sharpening up my accountability process. And now, no, I can't get it to you on Friday. No problem. What do we need to negotiate to make room? Or there may be some things that are non-negotiable. But let's have those conversations, not in a top-down way, but in a partnership approach. All right, I hope this has been useful to you to reflect on these conditions for accountability. Let me give you a call to action, keeping accountability alive in your organization and your life. Make your intention clear. Leave here saying, you know what? And maybe it's in one other relationship. Maybe it's a relationship with yourself. I'm going to be more accountable. I'm going to know what my values are, and I'm going to start to make agreements with myself. If my value is my health, what agreements am I going to take my health up a notch? Assess your own integrity gaps and make a plan to close those gaps. Just like there's gaps in integrity and how leaders and all team members, what they espouse and what they do, there's always a gap. But we got to be working at closing that gap. There's a gap because we're all human. Take ownership. Decide once and for all that all blame is a waste of time. You be the light. Paint a picture of the accountable mindset with your team. Develop what we call a team charter, a list of expected behaviors and agreements that we'll make to each other, and a process for dealing with situations when people knowingly or unknowingly break those agreements. Think partnership versus employees. Invest in the trust account in your relationships. Tell the stories. Never start a meeting without a story. I learned that from WestJet back when they had a great culture back in the 90s. Always start a meeting with a story. And what the story is, if you want to build more accountability, let's hear a story of where someone went the extra mile to keep a promise. Depending on what accountability means for your team, shine a light on it. Celebrate the success. And again, embrace the negative. When we're not making that, make it safe to talk about that gap. Work on being a differential leader. I think that should be a differentiated leader. So my bad. Regulated, compassionate, with clear values. Start developing stronger, clearer accountability agreements. Shape up those different areas and keep bringing to the organization what you expect from the organization. Or you can apply the same thing to your family. Keep bringing to your personal relationships what you expect from your personal relationship. Folks, I appreciate you hanging in there with me. Next month, we're going to be on Friday, December 19th, before the holidays. Your next complimentary webinar. It'll be called Life in Transition, Facing Adversity Through the Hero's Journey. Little different frame of mind. And if you need anything, please reach out to us. There's my website. You can get signed up for the next webinar from my website, and you'll also hear from us. So thank you very much for your attention and your time. And I'm now going to bring us back into the community